I'd like to welcome you to another Affinity 10 series video. My name is Nick with TDG. In this video, we're going to explore how we can set up a modular grid and a baseline grid to set up the foundation for a publication that we will be creating in future episodes. Currently on your screen, I'm showcasing a wide variety of layouts that were created utilizing a modular grid and a baseline grid. While a modular grid and a baseline grid work hand in hand during your document creation process, it's important to understand the main fundamental difference between the two. A modular grid will assist us with the layout and page structure of our document, while a baseline grid will assist us with the typography of our document, ensuring that all of our text is properly aligned. I like to think of a baseline grid similar to a notebook that you would have used in college or high school, where you have the blue horizontal rules running across the page. The same is true in working with a baseline grid in the design application, where we are going to create essentially a series of horizontal lines that we will use to align our text to. Before we can begin creating our publication, there are two important decisions we have to make right from the start. The first is going to be what size of publication are we creating. For this demonstration, I'm going to be creating a US letter size 8.5 inch by 11 inch, but there are a wide variety of publication sizes out there, such as 6 by 9, 8 by 10, or 8 3/4 by 10 3/4, just to name a few. The next important decision we have to make is what our default leading value is going to be that we're going to base our baseline grid on. I've already made the fundamental design decision that I'm going to be using a 10-point body copy as the foundation for all of my body text. A rule of thumb when creating a baseline grid is your leading value, which is the spacing between your lines of text, is going to be 1 or 2 points higher than your base body copy. And since I'm using a 10-point base body copy, my leading value I'm going to base on 12-point grid, which is what we will be using throughout this video. With those decisions out of the way, we can now begin our creation process. To start, I'm going to select a US letter size document, and the first item I'm going to change is actually going to be the document units from inches, and we're going to change this to points. The main reason for that is typography is of course based in points, and any calculation I do for my margins or for my modular grid, I want to make sure it's also based on the points system. We're going to go ahead and change this to points instead of inches, and we're also going to change the image placement to preferred length. Underneath the Pages panel, we will leave Facing Pages checkmarked. If yours is not checkmarked, please make sure to do so. Since we are working on a publication, we want to make sure we have the Facing Pages available. And we're also going to set our number of pages to 4, so we have at least one spread to work with. Underneath the Color tab, we're going to change our color mode to CMYK8 since we're targeting print. And for margins, I'm going to go ahead and link all of these together and set these to 0, and we'll create the margins after we have our new document set up. We're going to jump over to the bleed tab, and we're going to use the standard 1/8 of an inch bleed, or in this case 9 points on all sides, and now we can create our new document. With our new document now created, I can now introduce to you the first Toby tip of the series. Toby is my Yellow Lab design assistant. First Toby tip is, anytime you're setting up a modular grid or a baseline grid, you want to make sure you do that on the master page level. The reason for that is any new pages we add to our document, we want to ensure that they also utilize the same baseline grid and modular grid system that we are currently setting up. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump up to our master page A. We're going to double click on that. And we're going to begin by setting up the margins of our document. There are a couple rules of thumb you can use when setting up your margins for your document, but I also want to make sure you understand the importance of giving your margins a very careful consideration. Because anytime you're working in publication layout, you just don't want to use whatever standard default your design application gives you. You want to make sure you verify with your printer what the minimum margins are, but you also want to base your margins on your publication itself. And one rule of thumb you can do is by using your base leading value and doing a multiple of that for your sides. Another rule of thumb you can use is to just go ahead and do 2 times your leading value for all sides. So for this demonstration, we're going to go underneath the document setup. I'm going to go into my margins, And now I'm going to click to include my margins. For my margins, I'm actually going to do a multiple of our letting value, which is 12. And for the inner ones, I'm going to go ahead and set that to 48, or 4 times 12. I'm going to go ahead and unlink these because I want to modify these independently of each other now. And for the top and bottom, I'm going to do 5 times our letting value, or 60. And lastly, this is just personal preference. I want to make sure I go ahead and change this to a nice green color. So we'll go ahead and add in some cyan, add in some yellow, as I like my margins to always appear as green. And now with this foundation set, we can go ahead and click OK. If you don't see your margins are visible, make sure you toggle your preview mode to toggle those on so you're able to see them. And now we're going to begin setting up the baseline grid of our document. To do that, we're going to go underneath the View menu, and we're going to click on Baseline Grid. With Baseline Grid now selected, we want to go ahead and check mark Use Baseline Grid. And going back to the reference I made earlier in the video, thinking back to notebook paper you used in school, you'll now see we have blue horizontal lines running across our entire spread, and this is our baseline grid. However, instead of it being relative to the top of the spread, I want it to be relative to our main content area of our document, which is within our margins. So I'm going to align this to be top of margin. The grid spacing is our letting value for our document, and we've already determined that we are using a 12-point letting value. So we are going to drop this down to 12 point. And now if we take a look at our document, our baseline grid is aligning right with our top margin and also along with our bottom margin. If you find these lines to be too intrusive, you can lower the slider to lower the opacity on those so they're not so overbearing when you're setting up your document. We're now going to close out of this panel. Now there may be an instance I want to draw your attention to where when you're setting up your baseline grid, it may not fall in perfect alignment with your margins. If that's the case, I'm going to go ahead and just zoom in here and we'll do a hypothetical situation. Let's say, for example, your margins hung just slightly below your baseline. You want to make sure that your baseline grid is in sync with your margins. So if that ever happens to you where you have just a little bit of a spacing discrepancy between the two, the easiest way to correct that is to come over here and grab your rectangle frame tool, and you're going to draw the distance going from the baseline to your margin line. Come over here to your transform panel where you can see the height of that, and whatever value this is, you would add that to your bottom margin. And that will then bring your baseline grid in sync with your margins, which is what you want. You do not want to have an instance where the baseline grid is sitting slightly below or above your margins. So if that happens to you, it will vary from layout to layout, or depending on what value you enter for your letting value, that's how you can bring those back into sync. I'll go ahead and delete this. We'll zoom back out. Now we're going to begin setting up our modular grid, which is going to assist with the layout of our project. To do that, we're going to go back underneath the View menu. We're going to go underneath Guides. And underneath our guides, you'll see we have horizontal guides and vertical guides, which we can add independently. And we also have our column guides that we'll be setting up now. For my column guides, I'm going to go with basically an aspect ratio of 3:4 of this page. And I'm particularly going to set up a 12 column layout. And you're probably thinking, why 12 columns? Well, in this case, 12 columns is plenty wide for our page, but also 12 is a very popular factor and is very flexible as it is divisible by 2, 3, 4, and 6. So we have a lot of flexibility when working with 12 columns when creating our layouts. So I'm going to go ahead and type in 12. And on our page, we'll see a preview of our columns indicated by the gray fill. The reason why mine are filled is underneath the Style menu, I have this set to filled and a very light color of gray for the fill color. You can also change this to outlined, but I sometimes find that that's a little bit too overbearing. There's too many lines going across the page, and I find it easier if my columns and rows are filled. The next item we're going to adjust is going to be our gutter. And if you're not familiar with what the gutter is the white space between our columns here, or the space between our rows once we set up our rows. A rule of thumb is you want to have your gutter space equal to your letting value. So in this case, we're using a 12-point document grid or 12-point value for letting. So I'm going to enter 12 in for our gutter. The space tightens up in here, and now we can add our rows. So going with our ratio of 3 to 4, I know I'm going to need at least 16 rows. When I enter 16 rows, that's going to make a lot going on our screen and a little bit overbearing. So I'm going to make a subjective decision to cut this from 16 rows down to 8 and just have that. And that looks a little bit more manageable and not quite so busy. So with our 12 columns and 8 rows set up, I can click on close. But upon further inspection, if we zoom into our document, we have another problem here that has arisen. And that is, you'll notice our baseline grid and our gutters are not lining up. So we have a little bit of discrepancy and spacing issue going on. And the question becomes, how do we fix this? Because we want to make sure we do have it fixed where they're all lock in step with each other. So we're going to zoom out. And the easiest way I found to do this is grabbing our rectangle tool. From the top of our margin, I'm going to draw a frame down to the bottom margin. And over here in our transform panel, we'll see we have a height of 672. Now I want to know how many lines of text I currently have in this content area. So to find that out, I'm going to divide that by 12. And since I don't like doing math, I'm going to let Affinity do the math for me. And I'm going to hit enter. And we'll see it changes it to 56. So I now know I have 56 lines of text within this content area. So we're going to take a mental note of that, or you can also write it down. And then we're going to zoom in here. I know I have 8 columns or 8 rows in our document. And currently we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 rows or 6 lines of text are being occupied by each row. So we have 8 rows, we have 6, so 6 times 8 is going to be 48. But we also have to take into account the gutter between each row, which we have 7 of those. So 48 plus 7 gives us 55. Now if you remember, we had 56 lines in our content area, so we're off by 1. So to fix this, we're going to go back underneath our document setup. We're going to come into our margins. And now for the margins, I'm going to add 12 points. We're going to hit OK. And now our document grid and modular grid adjust. And you'll now notice that all of our baseline grids and our gutters are in line with each other, which is exactly what we are looking for in this setup. The next item I'm going to take a look at, and I want to emphasize that this is not super critical once you have this step done, but since I prefer my modular grid to be as square as possible, I'm going to measure one of our modules. In this case, I'm defining a module as 1 row and 2 columns. I'll see that this square is 72 points, which if we look at this, our module is just slightly wider than that. So I want to see what that difference is. So I'm going to get my selection tool. I'm going to drag over. And we'll see we have a 4-point difference in our sizing. Now across here, we have essentially 6 columns or 6 modules. So 4 times 6 is 24. So I know I have to make an adjustment of 24 points in my width to get a perfectly square module. So going back underneath our document setup, I'm going to go back underneath our margins. And in this instance, I'm going to add this all to the inner. So I'm going to add 24 points. We're going to say OK. And now just to double check, we're going to go back, grab our frame tool, and we're going to create a square across. And now they are perfectly in line and we have a perfectly square module. Is this absolutely critical after you had the initial steps set up? No, but I prefer to work off of a perfectly square grid and module setup. We're now going to go ahead and delete this. And we now have the foundation set for our baseline grid and our modular grid. And to demonstrate a little bit more of what this gives us the ability to do, I'm going to grab the rectangle tool. I'm going to go ahead and drag out a module. And we'll go ahead and make this just a little bit darker so it's easier to see. And I'm just going to duplicate this across the page several times. So here we notice we have our 12 columns, or in this case we have 6. But if I bring this down, it gives us the flexibility to do 3 columns. And bring it down farther. You can see we can have two areas of 6. We can have one of 12. And then we can start mixing and matching various sizes. So you'll see by doing this setup, while it seems limiting at first, we can create a wide variety of layouts and page structures very easily and efficiently using our baseline grid and document grid setup. The last step that I'm going to take is going to be more of a helpful benefit to us in future videos. After I have my baseline grid and document grid set up, I like to set up some other guides on the page that I can use while setting up our document. While this is the main content area for our publication, it is by no means where we are limited to. We are only severely limited by the absolute minimum margins. Now the minimum margins for this I know are 0.25 inches. So when I'm setting up some other guides that I can use, I like to have those indicated on the page so I know what area I'm working with. So going back underneath the View menu, we're going to go under Guides, and now we're going to set up some horizontal guides on our page. I like to change the color of these, so I'm going to go ahead and change these to a bright orange color. You can make them whatever color you want. So we'll go ahead and make these a bright orange. And we're going to start adding some horizontal guides to our page. I know for the first horizontal guide, I want that to be at the 1/4 inch mark, or in this case, 24 point, which is just a little bit larger than a 1/4 inch, but that's okay for this layout. We're going to set up another guide on our page. And since I don't like doing math, anytime you have a math field where you can enter numbers like this, you can have Affinity do the math for you. So I want this to be at the bottom. I'm going to do a times 2, and then minus 24. I'm going to hit enter, and that's going to give us our bottom safe zone. We're now going to set up some vertical guides to go by. I'm going to click on New again, and that's going to put it right here in the middle of the page. I know I want this one to be at 24 point for the left. We'll create a new vertical guide. And in this case, I want this to be minus 24 to give us our right-hand side. We will add another one in here. I'm going to add 24 to give us our margin over here on this page. And we will add another one in. And this is going to be the same instance. We're going to take this. We're going to multiply it by 2. And then we're going to subtract 24. And now we have our right safe area. And with this basic foundation set, we are now ready to begin the layout of our publication. I'd like to thank you for joining me in this session of Affinity 10. I do realize we went over the time by quite a bit. I do apologize for that, but I also want to give you a solid foundation and understanding for how these are set up and why they can be beneficial to you. Please subscribe to the channel if you found these beneficial, or give a like or leave a comment, and I'm happy to provide feedback and help you on your projects. Until I see you next time, happy designing, keep creating.